We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. I wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar this evening. My name is Dr. Lauren Levine. We had a great turnout, close to 400 people that were registered, and I see a bunch of you are just logging in right now. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping for a few minutes, and then we'll get into the bulk of the presentation. As I've been doing for my webinars for the last few years, first and foremost, I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe out there. I commend all of you for being here this evening and continuing your dental education. I know that it's really been pretty topsy-turvy for dental practices over the last couple of years, but it seems like we're getting back something close to normal again. So, and of course, you all know education never really ends with no matter what's going on with your practices. So, and of course, I'm just preaching to the choir because you're all here this evening. We've seen great turnout for these webinars, and as I said, we've got close to 400 people that were registered. This webinar is a little bit different than ones that I usually do. Normally, I just choose a topic that I think is of interest, and that's what I present. This time around, I polled a number of my clients to ask, what were your main questions that you had before you started working with me? And I condensed that into a list of the top 10 that I got. That doesn't mean you see the title of the presentation is all your IT, HIPAA, and cybersecurity questions. That doesn't mean it's your questions. I got 10, but you may have questions as well. That is why I always leave time at the end for a Q&A session. Now, with 400 people registered, we can't do verbal questions. So most of you have been on webinars in the past. You know how the process works, but on your screen, you have a GoToWebinar control panel. Type in your questions as you think about them. I can't actually see the questions right now until I'm done. So I will try to get to all the questions at the end. I've got nowhere else I need to be. The presentation will last about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll open it up for questions as well. In the next few days, look for a couple of things. First off, I have recorded this webinar as I do all my webinars. A recording will go out, usually it's sometime this evening, it might be as late as tomorrow morning. I will get that recording out to you. You can download it and view it at your convenience. So don't worry if you get distracted or can't stay to the end, you will get the full presentation. After every webinar, I always get emails asking about the continuing education credits. I'm going to try to mention it at least a couple of times, especially because I know some people still aren't on yet. I'm going to send out those CE forms later tonight or tomorrow as well. There is no test that you need to take. There's nothing you need to fill out, no registration. If you were here live and you're watching the webinar, you will be sent a CE form. That means you have to actually stay logged on though. You'd be surprised the number of people who email me after the webinar and say, hey, where's my CE? I didn't get it. And then I checked the log and they were only here for like 6 minutes. It doesn't work like that, obviously. I can't provide CE under those circumstances. That's kind of it for the housekeeping. So let's get started with the presentation. Just click here. So the format for this evening, I'm going to do a quick intro for those of you who don't know who I am. We're going to go through those frequently asked questions. What are those 10 questions that came up the most among our clients? I do want to make a few offers at the end for people, and then we are going to open it up, as I mentioned, to a Q&A session. I spent 10 years as a periodontist. I realized early on in my training that I did not love perio. I really wasn't good with materials, and so that kind of left me oral surgery or perio, and 3-week rotation at Boston City Hospital cured me of any desire to do oral surgery. But I found I didn't love perio as well. But one thing I did love was technology. My family owned an electronics business, and I was one of those very lucky people that I was able to, over time, kind of transition out of my practice and introduce doing something I still love, but I still work with dentists every day like I always did as well. So I became certified in a number of in IT certifications. And this is what I do. I work with offices all over North America. We actually have a few clients in Australia and the UK as well, where we help them with anything IT related. It started off with computers and networks and sensors and cameras and monitors and mounts, and we still do that every day. When HIPAA became a thing, quote unquote, then we started on HIPAA, And then, of course, over the last few years, it's all been about cybersecurity, ransomware as well. But we do everything, and certainly we would love the opportunity to work with any of you if you have specific questions or needs. So let's talk about those questions. What are those questions that I found were the 10 most frequent questions that people were asking? First off, as I said, ransomware is such a huge topic right now. And people want to know, well, how do I protect my practice from ransomware? What are the things that I really need and should be doing? We'll definitely talk about that this evening. How do I get 100% HIPAA compliant? How do I follow all the rules and regulations to get myself there? Can you get 100% compliant? I guess it would be the first question. And if so, how do we do that? One of the challenges with some of the things that we talk about is kind of no different than if a patient goes to 10 dentists, they're going to get 10 different treatment plans. Same thing with IT providers. If you ask an IT provider, what's the best way to back up my data? You're going to get 10 different solutions. Does that mean that the way that we recommend it is the best? Not necessarily. I mean, actually it is, but still, I'll explain why we recommend why we do what we recommend, and what certainly your options are as well. Do you need to encrypt your data? Is there any laws or rules or regulations that say you have to do it? And if so, how? And then, of course, why? Why would it be so important to encrypt your data? What about a risk assessment? Some of you, I'm sure, have heard about this. There's different terms: risk assessment, risk analysis. How do you do it? How do you get the guidance for how you're supposed to do this? We'll certainly talk about how I recommend that you do that this evening as well. What about keeping your systems up to date? Some people aren't aware that this is something you really can and need to be doing, but how do you do that? Is there an easy way? What do I recommend for how you do that? I'm sure most of you have heard about firewalls. We're going to define, exactly what is a firewall? What does it do? And do you really need one? Is it important for a dental office? A lot, especially during the beginning of COVID, but throughout all my years of doing this, we've always wanted to be able to access our data when we're at home or on vacation, traveling. How do you do that? And of course, now with HIPAA rules and regulations and with cybersecurity being such a big deal, we really need to understand, what the steps are to get to be able to access your data from home as well. I know a lot of you are in the market for replacing your hardware and computers. We went through this a couple of years ago in January 2020 when Microsoft ended support for Windows 7. We had a lot of people that were upgrading their equipment. We're going to be doing the same thing again next October 2023, when Windows 10 and Server 2012, I think, are end of life. So we'll be talking about this as well. But if you are in the market, what are the specs that I recommend that you get? And finally, how do you choose a good IT provider? I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there. And the goal here, of course, is to come up with a system that I can say, hey, this is how we do it. This is what we recommend. Again, my goal here is to not sell you on anything. Yes, as I said, I would love to work with any of you. Certainly that's one thing that we do for offices all the time, but there's no pressure here. I want to give you the information that you can use to take back and either talk to your current IT provider or talk with your team to say, hey, is there something that we really should be thinking about, looking for someone to help us with some of this. So why do we talk about this? Why are we talking about IT and cybersecurity and HIPAA? Why is this so important? It's impossible to go to any news website and not hear about some of the latest breaches or attacks that are out there. This was a big one that was really big news back in July of 2021. There was a company called Kaseya. A lot of us in IT use what's called RMM, remote management and monitoring, so that we can control computers that aren't around the corner from us, all over the world, that we can have access to those computers. A lot of the criminals got smart and said, hey, we can try to attack dental offices individually, but what if we could get into the IT provider's portal that they use to control all their computers? Now we can have access to hundreds, if not thousands, of computers. That's kind of the same deal that we have right now. Right now I've got 1,800 computers that we monitor and manage at any one time. If someone got into our portal, which allows for traffic both ways, you can push files both ways, you can just imagine the damage that they could do. So of course, we need to take steps to prevent that from happening. Of course, many of you, especially on the East Coast, we had probably heard last year about Colonial Pipeline. You know, they got breached. They paid billions, I think millions and millions of dollars in ransom. They ended up getting a lot of it back, which they had the weight of the U.S. government behind them. But one thing I highlighted here on the screen, which a lot of people don't know, is that it was the result of a single compromised password. You got people working remotely. Who knows how that password got into the wrong hands? Was it an accident? Did they sell it to somebody? You know, we don't really know, but that's all it took. Once someone got into that network, they can do all the damage that they can. So you can see like something that's so minor as this can end up causing, you know, so much damage. I mean, anyone on the East Coast, remember, you know, you had huge lines for fuel, reminded you of the, you know, the oil embargo back when 1972 or 3. I remember that fairly well. If you think that dental offices are immune to this, think again. This week, there's all kinds of reports of dental offices being hit. This was a few years ago. This was 400 offices in Wisconsin, mostly, that were all hit at the same time. There was another 100 or so offices in Colorado a few months later that were all hit at the same time. People don't realize this, that dental data, you know, the data that we have is probably the most valuable data on the black market. You think about what does your chart normally contain? And for most offices, that's going to be, I mean, what's in there? You got patient name, chart ID, date of birth, address, phone number, social security number, credit card information, just a boatload of information. So this is valuable stuff. Dental offices are absolutely targets. And as I mentioned, the way that a lot of them can get in is through these portals. We use something called ConnectWise Control. It used to be called Screen Connect. And like I said, if someone got into our portal, they could absolutely do a lot of damage. One question that you should be asking your IT provider, especially if they do something similar, is what type of security do you have in place to prevent people from getting into your portal? The most common that we recommend is something called two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, another term. It's something many of you are probably familiar with your banking sites or other sites where you log in with your username and password, but then you get sent a separate code, usually on your cell phone. It could be email as well. You have to enter that second code. So, you know, we have that set up. Another thing that you can and probably should do, at least as an IT company, is do some type of IT control. In other words, IP management, so that we can say to our portal, hey, if it comes from these IP addresses, which belongs to me, my team, you know, that's okay. But if you see something coming from an IP address that's different than ours, don't let it in. So there's a lot of things that the IT company can and should be doing to protect you know, that portal. Ransomware is just a huge concern right now. Any of you that are getting cyber liability or breach insurance are I'm sure aware of this. You've seen the premiums go up. There's a number of insurance companies that are no longer even offering this insurance because they know there's a good chance. Just some statistics to throw out there. This is from the state of ransomware, which is last year. They found that about a third of all healthcare organizations were hit by ransomware in the last year. And of those, 2/3, so that's what, 129, so 22% of all healthcare organizations had their data encrypted. You know, a fifth, that's a lot. Almost half of them used backups to restore their data, and about a third of them paid the ransom. To me, the statistic that is the most sobering is the one below that, where it says on average, only 69% of the encrypted data was restored, meaning you got hit with ransomware, you decided to pay the ransom, you got the unlock key, but little over 2/3 of your data was able to be recovered. You still lost a third of your data, which for a lot of offices, that's no better than losing all of it. So this is pretty scary stuff, and it's something that I think offices really need to be on top of. So we're talking about, let's get into more of the nitty-gritty. How do you protect your data from ransomware? Because as I said, I think that this is the biggest threat to dental offices in forever, possibly. And it's such a common occurrence right now. You really need to be prepared. Well, first off, we need to make sure we're talking about the same thing. You know, what is ransomware? It's a type of malware. Malware means a virus or anything like that that prevents or limits users from accessing their system, either locks the screen. Those are the old style ransomware was locking the screen. You don't see those hardly anymore. The more common ones where they lock the user's files until you pay a ransom. And most of the modern ones, which are also called crypto ransomware, they encrypt certain file types so that you just can't open up your data files. And you've got to pay online. You've got to get a decryption key. If you were wondering, they do not take checks. They do not take Visa. They do not take green stamps. It's all usually in Bitcoin or Ethereum or some type of cryptocurrency. What would typically happen is you get into your office on whatever day that happens on, and you'll have some type of pop-up like a notepad. This is actually one from a client of ours where it basically said your files are encrypted and you got to use a special browser, an encrypted browser called the Tor browser to be able to log in. And that's where they tell you, here's how much the ransom is going to be. So this is not something you ever want to see on any of your screens. Why is it such a big deal? I mean, so what? So you got some files that get locked, you can always get out of that, right? Well, let's talk about it. First off, in order to be functional, you need to remove the ransomware. That is not always an easy process. The typical office that we work with, from the time they report an infection to the time that we're pretty much out of the woods, is usually about a week. Now, sometimes it's quicker than that. We can oftentimes figure out where the ransomware came in and that day, the next day, but you need to get it off there. You still need to deal with all the consequences of that. And on average, most offices saying that they about $65,000 it costs them. That's just for the downtime and lack of production. Obviously, if there's legal issues, if there's fines and penalties, if there's lawsuits, it's going to be significantly worse off than that. We hear it all the time, about these different types of ransomware. It's hitting all kinds of companies. This is Accenture, they got hit as well. One of the things that people oftentimes say to us, and that was one of the numbers I showed you there, is that close to half, 44% of offices use a backup. A backup's going to save you, right? Well, not necessarily, because if these criminals actually copied the data, they took your data and put it on their systems, now you have to worry about what's called double and triple embezzlement, not embezzlement, it's double encryption. I can't remember what the word is, not encryption, but extortion, double extortion and triple extortion. Double extortion is where they say, okay, you're not going to pay, fine. We're going to go ahead and put your data online on a website, and we're going to let people be able to go in. And you can see these websites all over the place. That's the double extortion. The triple extortion is if you still decide, nope, I'm not paying the ransom. In a lot of cases, depending on what type of data you have, they can get into that data. Now they have your patient data. They can start calling and emailing your patients up and say, hey, by the way, Dr. Smith got hit with ransomware and they're refusing to pay. And your data's out there. Usually that's enough to get you to decide you're going to pay the ransom. The one thing I would always recommend is never, ever, if you can help it, never tell these criminals that you have insurance. Sometimes you can probably negotiate with them a little bit. Once they find out that you have insurance, forget it. That's the end of the negotiations. So again, it's not enough just to have a backup, unfortunately. What about the HIPAA side of this? If you're hit with a ransomware virus, is that a breach? Have you gone through a breach? And I think it might be a surprise for a number of you that the answer is true. That is considered a breach. Back in 2016, if you don't believe me, you can Google this. You can do ransomware HIPAA, and you'll see a document from 2016 where they go through the process. It's number 7 here. What I'll do, I actually blew this up, and what they basically say is that you don't have to declare a breach if there's a very low probability of compromise. Can you answer positively to all these questions? Well, first off, the nature and extent of the EPHI and likelihood of re-identification. It's your dental record. You can easily re-identify. So you fail on that question. Do you know the person who got access to that information? Nope, you probably don't. That's, you're 0 for 2. Do you know whether the data was actually viewed by them or not? Nope. So now you're 0 for 3. In the extent to which the risk has been mitigated. So typically at that point, yes, at some point you can mitigate the risk, but basically 3 out of 4 of those questions that you're answering no to, which means you pretty much have to declare a breach if you've been hit with ransomware. So, that's something that a lot of people were not aware of, and hopefully you are now. All the more reason you want to keep ransomware off your system. The reason that declaring a breach, I think, is such a bad thing is that unlike a lot of HIPAA, which is somewhat ambiguous, the breach notification is very clear cut. What it says is that if you have suffered a breach, you must notify all the patients in writing, not an email, not a notice on your door. You have to notify the local news media as long as you've got 500 or more patients, which for most of you that would be true. You have to notify Health and Human Services. They have a special website. It's called the Wall of Shame. It's definitely not a place that you want to have your practice listed. All these things are things that you must do if you suffered a breach. So we really want to avoid having a breach under any. I think of all the things that could happen to your practice, this is the worst. If you have to send out a letter to patients notifying them of a breach, the question isn't going to be, are you going to lose patients? It's how many are you going to lose? So we really want to try to avoid this. We want to make sure that we keep our antivirus and anti-ransomware and spyware always on, always up to date. There's some good programs out there. I don't recommend the free ones. We've had good luck with one called MSIsoft. We used to use ESET, Nod32, Trend Micro. They're all decent, but you want to get a good general purpose as well as a ransomware specific software to help you with that. Ones that we've seen out there that we don't really recommend are the free ones like Avira. ESET is one that we actually have used. Norton's, I never liked Norton's, so I would stay away from that one. There are good ransomware specific ones. Intercept X is the one that we use. Hitman Pro is also a good one. They're both owned by the same company, Sophos, so it really doesn't make a difference which one you get, but they both kind of do the same thing. In my mind, even though I think ransomware is a big concern and a big issue, the number one thing that you can and should be doing is what we call application whitelisting and ring fencing. I think one of the things that people need to understand is that in the past, 20, 30 years ago, you could just go out and get an antivirus program and slap it on there, and you were basically done. That's the only thing that you really had to do. Those days, unfortunately, are long gone. It's the days of just throwing one program on there, unfortunately, in my mind, are no longer really valid. What you really need to be doing is like a layered approach or a stacked approach to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to protect ourselves. Application whitelisting, in my mind, is the game changer. Let's talk about what actually this is. What you do is you index certain, a network, a computer, and make a list of all the approved software that are able to run on there. The whole goal of this is to say, here's the stuff that can run. Anything else that's not on that list, we're not going to let that in. Ring fencing is somewhat similar, a little bit different. Any of you that use third-party programs, people that use Yappy and Smile Reminder, Solution Reach, and Demand Force, ones like that, ring fence is in place where your practice management software says, I'm going to control which data accesses my database and which does not. So you want to have that in place. The best analogy I can give you with application whitelisting is, let's say that there is a private party that you heard about and a lot of celebrities are going to be there. You decide you want to go crash that party, and you show up at the party, and there's a really large bouncer there with a list of names doesn't have your name on it. Basic rule of thumb is that if you're not on the list, you ain't getting in. Same thing, that's what application whitelisting is. If a program is pre-approved and it's allowed to run, it can run normally. If a program tries to run and it's not on that list, it will be blocked. It literally can't run. So this infographic kind of shows you that process where we scan the system. We usually run the scan for about a week or two. We have about 350 active clients that we support. So, we'll have all the information on there that we gather from all those offices. We combine it together into like a global list. And if any program tries to run, it will be initially blocked. And then at that point, something will be sent to us. I think I have a slide that shows what happened. Yeah, so then we would get, the office would get a little pop-up that tells them they're requesting to run a new program. That will get sent to us automatically, and then we can decide if it's something that should be cleared, or maybe we need to explore it a little bit further to see what it is. The good news is that that entire process, from the time that someone sends us the alert to the time we can have it resolved, is usually about 90 to 120 seconds. It doesn't rarely take more than a couple of minutes for us to be able to approve a software. But this basically says that any unapproved software, any program, and all viruses are just programs. They're just a series of instructions that tells the program what to do. A ransomware virus is a set of instructions that will tell it to get on this computer, hide yourself, disable the antivirus software that you see, lock the files, leave a note, get off. That's basically it. They're not that much more complicated than that. So that will not be able to run. They'll get the pop-up and it'll get stopped in its tracks. What about HIPAA? One of the questions that I get all the time from people is, well, how do I get 100% HIPAA compliant? I really want to get there. My answer is, you don't. It's impossible. I found this online. This is the HIPAA administrative simplification. This is the Reader's Digest version of the HIPAA rules and regulations. That's 115 pages. If you actually look at the full text of it, which starts with the privacy rule back in 1996 and goes all the way through the high-tech and omnibus rule of 2013, there's more than 700 pages of rules and regulations. You cannot get 100% compliant. And if any company approaches you and says, hey, we guarantee you'll pass an audit, we guarantee you'll be 100% compliant, run for the hills. It's not possible. That being the case, we've had a number of offices who have gone through audits, and we know there's a core list of about 9 to 10 things that they're looking for. If you resolve those issues, if you have this under control before they get there, you're going to be in way better shape than an office that doesn't. What's that list? Number one, and it all starts with it, and the analogy I can give you is that when you are treating the patient, you just don't start treating them the minute they show up at your office. I mean, I hope you're not. You are doing a full assessment. You're taking your radiographs and doing your restorative charting and perioprobing, intraoral, extraoral exams. And based on all of that, you put together your treatment plan. You start treating them. Same thing with HIPAA. How do you know where you're at unless you look? You have to do a proper risk assessment and develop their version of a treatment plan called the HIPAA management plan. Other things they're going to look at. Do you have a solid backup and disaster recovery plan in place? We're going to talk about that before the evening is done. Is everything encrypted? Are you patching everything? Is everything current and up to date? Do you have some type of firewall in place? Do you have anti-malware, anti-ransomware software? What about your communications? Do you have some type of encrypted email system? Policies and procedure manual. Do you have something like that in place? It's so easy to get one of those. We provide it for our clients, but you can go to the ADA. There's lots of sources for that. And the other thing they tend to look at is, have you done some type of staff training? Because it is a HIPAA law that says you have to keep them current and up to date as well. Let's talk about backup. Again, you can go to different IT companies. You're going to get different suggestions on how to do a backup and disaster recovery plan. I'm going to make my recommendation to you, but there's always options. If any of you are still using tape backup, well, good luck. The problem with tape backup, of course, is that you need a tape drive to read that tape. Most offices, they only have one tape drive, and that's in the server. Server goes down, so goes your tape drive. So you've got a great paperweight, but you don't have any way of reading the tape. So tapes really aren't my recommended way of doing it. There was a time where we used to recommend rewritable CD-ROM drives and DVD drives, but they're pretty limited. They have, CD-ROM drives can only hold about 750 megs of data. DVD, if they're double-sided, they can probably do, what is it, like 16, 17 gigabytes, but most offices have way more data than that. We still have offices that use external or portable hard drives. They're okay. They have unlimited storage. Certainly, you want to make sure that they're durable, that you have multiple copies. We'll talk about the needs for encryption, but you don't want to take it out of the office unless it's encrypted. They come in all shapes and sizes as well. The reason I'm not usually a fan of these is that it requires you to do something. You know, you have to run the backup, take it out of the office. There is a HIPAA law that says you have to check and verify and test your backups. Most practices either don't have the time, the skill, or both to be able to do that. So, you know, we're not a huge fan of external hard drives, although it's certainly the least costly option. I mean, you can get a decent hard drive that will back up all your practice for, you know, less than $100. We'll get you something that will work. Software comes in all shapes and sizes. There's free programs. This is one called Karen's Replicator that we used for years. There's SyncBack Pro. But I am just a huge fan of getting it offline. Get it to some type of data storage out of your office. Online data storage is definitely the way to go. Get it off-site. It's secure. It's an automated process. The criteria that you look for is make sure whatever system you're using, that it's HIPAA compliant, that it has encryption keys to be able to recover the data. Whichever company you're using, make sure they don't just have one backup. You know, they have to have a backup of the backup of the backup. You want to have multiple copies of that. You want to program, you know, most programs, you're supposed to close them out at the end of the day, but a lot of people forget, or maybe you've got it open on one computer. You want a program that can run the backup and still be able to back up that data, even if someone forgot to close it out. You need to have multiple versions. A lot of times you may not be aware that there's a problem with your data until a few days later, and you know the previous day's backup is just a backup of corrupted data. You may need to go back a few days. You want to be able to restore the entire server, but also just individual files. And it really should be an automated process where it's set it and forget it. You know, when we do it for our clients, we of course monitor it every single day. But as our clients, they don't have to worry about it because it's all being handled automatically. The one that we do for our clients, we call it Data Protect. As I said, there's multiple options out there for backup and disaster recovery. It's important to understand that if you are like most practices and you have a server with mirrored hard drives, we call it RAID, which stands for a redundant array, and the I can either be inexpensive or independent, and the D is disks. There's RAID 1, which is what we typically recommend, which is 2 drives. There's RAID 5, which is 3 or more. There's RAID 10, which is 4. That is not backup. That's redundancy. If your server is stolen, if there's a fire, a flood, having those mirrored hard drives isn't going to help you. You need to have something that's offsite. It can be an external hard drive. It can be online. The way that we set up our backup is that we have a second device. It doesn't have to be a full server. It can be a workstation. It can, in theory, be an external hard drive that we recommend it be like a souped up Dell workstation. That is an exact duplicate of the server. We take all the data from the server, we virtualize it, not just the data, but the program files, the network settings, everything. If your server goes down for any reason, we fire up that virtual copy of the server, and literally within minutes, you're up and running again. Now, typically the process takes longer than that. Normally, if we're going to help an office out, we want to try to recover the main server first. That's usually our first order of business. But if that doesn't work, then we're going to restore the backup, and that can be really quick. But we usually tell people, you know, an hour or two, and we can get you back up and running in almost all circumstances. Again, it kind of depends on what software you're running there. Do you need to encrypt? You know, is there an advantage to encryption? So why would people encrypt? There's a little bit, in my mind, of misinformation out there when it comes to encryption. Encryption is mentioned in the HIPAA rules and regulation. They call it addressable. You have to, you have to do it, but it's an addressable concern. Well, what does that mean? There are 2 types of HIPAA rules. There are required rules, which that's pretty self-explanatory. You got to do it, and addressable. I've emphasized in bold letters here, you know, what the addressable means. It means a covered entity, which is you, a dental office, must, not maybe, must implement an addressable implementation if it's reasonable and appropriate, and must do, or an alternative if the addressable implementation is unreasonable and appropriate. It all goes back to that term, reasonable and appropriate. Well, what does that mean? Who gets to determine that? You do initially. It's your practice. You get to decide. So for something like encryption, you can say, you know what? I don't think that encryption is really reasonable and appropriate. So then your two other choices are, well, you come up with some alternative to encryption. And if there is no alternative, then you document that. You say, well, there's no alternative that exists. And there are some speakers out there that I've heard that basically are saying, hey, this basically means you don't have to do that. That's not the way I interpret it at all. And let's use this as an example, encryption as an example. Every version of Windows from Server 2012 onwards and Windows 10 onwards has a free, as in no charge, encryption software called BitLocker. It's built into the operating system. Now, you'll probably want to pay an IT company to set it up, make sure it's done properly, but you don't have to go out and spend thousands of dollars on this encryption software. It's there for free. So you can imagine how the conversation is going to go, that if an auditor comes into your office and they say, hey, we noticed that your server's not encrypted. Why didn't you do it? And you say, well, I just didn't think it was reasonable and appropriate. I think the response would be along the lines of, well, why not? It's free. It's right there. You just have to turn it on. Why would you not do something like that? The other thing that's really critical to understand, we talked earlier about the breach notification rule, that you have to declare a breach, if you've been hit with ransomware. You actually have a get out of jail free card, and it's called encryption. If you have evidence that you encrypted your server, if you've documented that, you are exempt from the breach notification. You do not need to declare a breach if you can prove that your server was encrypted. So who cares about the reasonable and appropriate if you ever get audited? To me, this is the fact that you have a get out of jail free card far outweighs any possible reason that you wouldn't want to encrypt. Now, there were some practice management software companies initially that said, hey, we don't recommend encryption because it can slow things down. Real world, we see on average, if you're opening up a chart, for example, about a 1/10 of a second slowdown. So if your chart normally takes 1.2 seconds to open up, it's going to take 1.3. I mean, it's so negligible. You just can't justify not encrypting your server or any other device where you have protected information. Most offices really should keep all their data on the server. The reality is a lot of practices, the office manager might have scanned EOBs on her desktop or communications. The dentist might have some photos on his computer. Those need to be encrypted as well. If you're using a really old system, a Windows 7, Server 2008, you shouldn't because it's not HIPAA compliant. But there's other programs. There's other free programs like VeraCrypt and TrueCrypt. So you always have some software out there that you can use to encrypt. Next question we always get, how do you do a risk assessment? Well, if you look at the HIPAA rules, I'm sure there's just a ton of information about it, right? Well, if you look here, you see under section A there, risk analysis required, conduct an accurate and thorough assessment. That's it. That's all there is for your guidance. That being the case, there is a document out there. It's been made by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's document 800-30. Tells you how to do a risk assessment. It's 95 pages long. If you suffer from insomnia, it's a great cure for that. It's very dry, but it says what most of you probably already know. You need to be thorough. There are some companies out there, unfortunately, that will tell people, go online and take this 10-minute questionnaire and boom, you've done your risk assessment. I can promise you that an auditor, if they ever saw that, would laugh at you initially and then say, no, really, show us your real risk assessment. That is not a risk assessment. You have to look at things from an administrative standpoint, policies and procedure manuals, incident response forms, from a physical standpoint, locks on the doors, alarm systems, but the biggest chunk of it is the IT part of it as well. You need to make sure you've done a comprehensive evaluation. When we do it for our clients, it's about a 5 to 8 hour process. We only need the client for about 10 minutes to get us logged onto the systems, but it does take some time. If it's done properly, the way that we recommend it, you would have some type of risk score. You would have a pretty significant document that actually goes through all the things that were found and how those contributed to the risk score. And then you should have with that their version of the treatment plan, the HIPAA management plan, which actually tells you here's the things that you really need to be doing to get yourself more secure. So, we highly recommend that you do a proper formal risk assessment. And this is something that we do for pretty much all of our clients. Because like I said, you don't know until you've actually looked. Another question that we get a lot is, what about patching? Is this something that I need to do? Is there some type of HIPAA requirement that says you have to patch your software on a regular basis? And again, hopefully this isn't too much of a surprise, but that answer is true. It's called patch management. You have to keep your systems current and up to date. That's right from the Office of Civil Rights. This is why when Windows 7 went end of life in January 2020, that we were telling people to replace their computers. It wasn't because Microsoft ended support. Most of our clients never called Microsoft for support in their lives. It was because they stopped patching it. And there's no law that says you have to run a specific operating system. There is a HIPAA law that says you have to keep things current and patched. If you do a risk assessment, the risk assessment will show you're running this unpatched operating system. What are you going to do to mitigate the risk? And the answer usually is nothing. You can't, no matter how much firewall you throw at it and antivirus software. An unpatched operating system is an inherent risk, and the best way to alleviate that is to replace it with a current operating system. So make sure that you are updating your system with security patches as soon as they become available. The other reason you do that is that with an unpatched operating system, that's a very common way that hackers can get into your system, usually in pretty quick order. So like I said, make sure you're doing this on a regular basis. I highly recommend that you have a firewall. One question that we oftentimes get from offices is, well, do I need a HIPAA compliant firewall? And the answer is no, because there's no such thing as a HIPAA compliant firewall. HIPAA is a set of rules and regulations that guide you on how to secure and protect your data. HIPAA does not approve hardware or software as being compliant or not. It's not compatible. Now, there are certainly ones that can get you more towards compliance than others, but there's nothing that says, this one is compliant, this one isn't. To make sure you understand what a firewall is, there's all kinds of firewalls. There's hardware, software. We always recommend a hardware firewall. A firewall basically just controls traffic in and out of your network. They've been around for 20, 30 years. It's just a barrier. It's the first line of defense for anything that's coming in or out of your network. And we definitely recommend that you have a hardware firewall. Now, there are all kinds of firewalls, like I said. We don't recommend the ones that you would use in your home, the Linksys and Netgears and D-Links. They work. As I said, there's nothing that says you are not in compliance with HIPAA, but there's better ones out there. I like the Sophos models. Some people use SonicWall. But as I said, you need to make sure that you're doing everything to prevent yourself from getting breached, because this really would be, I think, just devastating to any practice. When we do a risk assessment for one of our clients, as part of that, we do penetration testing. We check to see, can we get in through their firewall? If you have any applications that are opening ports or doing port forwarding on your firewall, that's a no-no. You want to try to find another option for that. This is the one that as I said, we like the Sophos models, but there's a lot of decent ones. A decent business class firewall is going to run you somewhere $500 to $800, somewhere in that range, and most of them have some type of anti-malware subscription. Usually it's a couple $100 a year, and we would certainly recommend that you invest in this as well. One of the biggest issues that we see with Office, and one of the questions we get a lot is, well, what about remote access? How do I get access to my data? Because I have multiple offices, or I get patients that call me up on the weekends when I'm at home, or I go on vacation once every decade and I want to make sure I can access my office. How do we do that? There's 3 ways you can do it. You can do it through a cloud application, remote control, or a VPN. Let's talk about each one of those. Cloud applications. Cloud computing, I put a really fancy term here for cloud computing and all this type of stuff. I'm going to tell you what the true definition of cloud computing is. Here it is. somebody else's server. That's what cloud computing is. You're using a server, you're connecting to someone else's server that's not yours. This is all basically what cloud computing is. What are the pros of cloud computing? Well, you certainly usually have good security. Now this, again, this is dependent on the cloud company, but assuming you're working with a reputable company, the security they have in place is typically far more advanced than what most dental offices have within their practices. I think if you're a multi-location practice, a DSO, there's nothing better than cloud computing. It's the right way to do it, and I highly recommend if you have more than one location. This is way easier than dealing with remote access and VPN, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. I say they're easy to configure. There's nothing to configure. You sign in with your browser and you're on. That's all you need to do. You don't have to worry about backup of this specific data. One of my pet peeves with some of these cloud companies is they say to offices, hey, if you go with our software, you don't need to worry about backup. And that would be true. You don't need to worry about backup of your practice management software. HIPAA says you need to back up any protected health information. What about your emails? What about QuickBooks or Invisalign or your images or a Word document or a spreadsheet or a scanned document? All of those are just as much protected health information as your practice management data. They need to be backed up, they need to be encrypted. So even for offices that are getting cloud computing, we tell them they still really need to have a server. And of course, if they're doing all the things that they should be doing, you get really good HIPAA compliance. On the downside, they're not cheap. Most of the better ones out there, depending on the bells and whistles that you get, you're probably looking at around $500 to $700 a month is typical for most of them. We've seen some a little bit less, some quite a bit more. If your internet goes down, you go down. So you need to make sure you've got a really solid connection. We oftentimes recommend that they have some type of backup connection, whether it's a hotspot or a second type of connection like a DSL or something coming into the office. You really don't have much control over the system. I mean, you're at the mercy of the vendor as far as what the software, how it looks and feels, and what it can actually do. You're kind of locked into that vendor as well. A lot of times third-party programs don't work with some of these web-based systems. And again, sometimes you're dependent on them telling you, hey, this is what we're doing to be HIPAA compliant. You don't know that they're doing that. You have to obviously have a signed business associate agreement with them. We'll talk about that at the end here. But there's a lot of good systems out there. Many of you are familiar with Curve. Dentrix has their cloud version. Some of you may not be aware that Open Dental, which is a great program, they have a cloud version. They've actually had it for a number of months now. They're not advertising it as much as I think they should, but that's a good option for you. Apteryx, they're exclusively with their web version. They had both an on-premise and cloud, and they've stopped supporting and selling their on-premise solution. So they have a web version as well. You can get your QuickBooks online. I mean, there's a lot of applications. Even QuickBooks has like a private cloud. So you can almost like a hybrid where you can use a server for multiple locations. So there's lots of choices here. You can even get Windows. You can even get your computer online. It's called Windows 365 that you can connect to a Windows computer from either another computer or from an iPad or an Android tablet or anything. You basically have a cloud computer up there. So lots of cloud options out there. The one that most of you are probably familiar with is what's called remote access, remote control. And it's something that we do as an IT company multiple times a day. It's something that a lot of our clients do as well, where you log into another computer in your office as if you were sitting directly in front of that computer. The advantages of that is that there's a lot of programs that are free or very low cost to do something like that. They're relatively easy to set up, assuming you use a system that doesn't require some type of port forwarding or opening up, which again, as I mentioned, we don't want to do that for your firewall. If you've got internet, you can access it from anywhere in the world. And they're pretty easy to learn how to use these systems. But as with everything, there's pros and cons. As I said, some of them do require some type of technical skills for port forwarding. You really, as I said, you don't want to do this, but there are some cases where you do have to open up that port in order to let some things through. One of the rules with HIPAA is that you need to track who accessed patient information and when do they access it, what do they do with it. That's true whether you're in the office or logging in remotely, and a lot of them don't have that built in, where you have auditing and logging that allows that to happen. You want to also have what's called auto shut-off. Let's say you're working at home, you're working remotely, you walk away from your computer, you don't want to leave it up there on the screen so that your kids can come on and who knows what. You want to have some type of system in place so that after X minutes of time, 10, 15 minutes, it's going to shut off that connection. A lot of them don't have that as well. And the other thing, of course, is that, if you say have some type of staff member that wants to work from home, if they're logging into another computer remotely, that computer is now in use. Like I said, it's no different than someone sitting right there in front of it. So that computer is no longer available for anyone else to use in the office if that person is logged in remotely. So you need an extra computer for each remote user. There's all kinds of systems out there for remote access. Microsoft has one built in. It doesn't have a lot of the HIPAA stuff. We don't really recommend this at all. It's called Remote Desktop Services. VNC is one that we used for years. Again, it's not really HIPAA compliant. TeamViewer is. TeamViewer absolutely has auditing and logging and all the stuff that we talked about. Splashtop is as well. As an IT company, we have different ones that we use. There was Kaseya, that's the one that got hacked last year. We used them like 5 years ago. We weren't happy with them, so we don't use them anymore. One called Atera, which is one that we do use for our clients. So again, there's all kinds of systems that are available out there. The third one is what's called a VPN, a virtual private network. The best analogy I can give you with a virtual private network is that it basically extends your private network. So within your office, let's say you have 10 computers. Those computers are all connected to each other through a switch or a hub, and to the server through cables, usually maybe through Wi-Fi as well. Let's say you could draw an imaginary cable all the way from your office to your home. It's an invisible cable all the way to your house. That's what a VPN is. It's an encrypted, secure tunnel from your location to your office. This picture, I think, does a better job of showing you. It's got, remote computer. It's got this tunnel, the secure tunnel, that basically that computer becomes part of the network. So it can access the server just the way the workstations that are inside the office can access the server as well. These are incredibly secure systems. They are encrypted with, depending on which kind you get, but they have like 256-bit encryption or higher. They're relatively not that difficult to set up and maintain them on a regular basis, at least for the cost standpoint. Once your computer is connected to your internal network, you can move files as if you were switching files between two computers inside the offices as well. These can be, especially depending on what type of system you use, they can be very tricky to set up. That encryption, that overhead, is going to take away close to half of your internet speed when you're connected. So, if you're doing like a lot of graphically intense applications, it's going to seem really sluggish because, to have that encryption takes away 40% of your bandwidth right off the top. These can be a bear to maintain as well. Ask me how I know. They're definitely not the most reliable setups as well. Normally, you're going to use some type of hardware. You would need like a special router, VPN routers that you put on each end, one in the office, one at home. There are software ones that are really easy to use, like LogMeIn. It's called Hamachi. That it works. It's not the zippiest out there. It may not be the most secure as well. So as I said, you need to be careful with some of these systems. The one thing I want to be sure that you understand is that there's different types of VPNs. Most of you may be more familiar with systems like NordVPN and ExpressVPN. Those are systems that hide your IP address. And the most common way that people use that, let's say you're traveling to overseas and you want to be able to pull up Netflix. Well, actually, Netflix is not a great example because they've got better security in place. But in the past, what people would do is, Netflix would only show American shows to American viewers. So if you were traveling, if you were in Canada, another country, you couldn't watch those shows. But if you could trick Netflix to thinking that you were on an American server, then you could watch the shows. So that's what a VPN is, that you would log into this American server, and then that server would send out the request to make it look like you are somewhere else. It also works in reverse, that you can look like you're in Europe or Africa, wherever. That's not what I'm talking about for VPN. I mean, this is more of a consumer use VPN, which has, I think limited uses. The one I'm talking about is a direct connection between, two locations. If you are in the market for a new server, what do I recommend? Well, you want to get a server that can handle multitasking. We recommend a Xeon processor, at least 16 gigs, if not 32 gigabytes of what's called ECC. It's error checking RAM. Many of you are familiar with what's called a BSOD, a blue screen of death. When your computer crashes and you get that blue screen, it's pretty rare to see it on servers because most of them have this error checking memory. You want to use a more current version of Windows Server. We still use 2019 because there's a number of dental applications that aren't officially supporting 2022 quite yet. We want to make sure you have a ton of space. We do 4 terabyte encrypted drives that are mirrored. You can go larger than that as well. 4 terabytes seems to be good unless you're doing just a ton of cone beam images, and then we'll typically go 8 or 12. We normally get our servers from Dell. They come with a same day 4-hour support contract, 3-year warranty, a decent server, a plan to spend. Again, it just depends. Lately server prices have gone up because of supply chain issues, availability, but we're seeing on average 3,500 to 3,800, somewhere in that range for, that has all these specs that I've talked about. For the workstations, I like the Optiplex line or the Precision line. And we happen to like Dell because they have on-site support, which is critical for us. Most of our clients are out of state. A Core i5 or Core i7, again, depends on your applications. We also do 16 gigs of RAM. Windows 10 Professional, if you can still get it. Windows 11 tends to work, but again, there's some applications that don't officially support it yet. We do like these M.2 SSD drives, at least 256 gigabytes, but you don't need anything larger than that, to be honest, because most offices are storing their data on their server, not on the workstation. You don't really need a big drive there. Next business day for the support contract. You can get same day, but it tends to jack up the price, and a 3-year warranty for these as well. What about choosing a new IT provider? I mean, yeah, I could say, choose us. That would be easy. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I think there's certain questions that you really should be asking your current IT provider or when you're interviewing new people. First off, are they exclusive to dental? There are a number of IT companies out there that work with dental, but that's not all they work with. They work with banks, they work with attorneys, they work with physicians. I personally think that dental is so resource intensive. You really need to know your stuff. You need to have familiarity with all the practice management software programs out there, all the image software programs, all the third-party applications that bridge to them. You really need to have, some dental experience. Certainly this is one thing that I thought was critical. I've had people throughout the 20+ years I've been doing this that have said to me, hey, Lauren, why don't you work with physicians or accountants or attorneys? And I say, well, dental is fine. We're happy. We have plenty of clients. We're always getting new clients. So, but I would certainly recommend someone that's got an extensive dental background. Find out how long they've been doing this. You don't want an IT company that's only been around for a couple of years. At least 5 years, I think, that they've had of experience. We talked about this earlier. Are they using security to secure, their access to your data? Do they have 2-factor or multi-factor authentication in place? Can they do risk assessment? This is something that really kind of surprises me because I'm friendly with a lot of dental IT companies out there, some that I have a ton of respect for, that we work with on multiple clients together on, and there are very few people out there doing risk assessments. As I said, from a HIPAA standpoint, I think as an IT provider, it's our obligation to help offices get HIPAA compliant. And the only way to know where you're at is to do a proper risk assessment. And there are so few companies doing these risk assessments. So that's a question I think you really should ask your IT companies. Do you do these? And do they have, a lot of expertise with HIPAA? HIPAA's been around for, like I said, a long time. HIPAA's been around since '96. We're into year 26 of that. Yes, it was just a privacy rule initially, but at least the IT part, those rules became finalized in 2009, the HITECH Act. So that's 13 years. People at this point really should have familiarity with HIPAA. So if I were to make some recommendation, what are the things that I think that offices should do right now to get themselves more secure, more HIPAA compliant. These are the things that, this is just kind of a recap of what we talked about. And as soon as I'm done, I will make some offers, and then we'll get into the Q&A session. As I said, I think you really have to start with a risk assessment, just like you have to start with x-rays and an exam. I mean, it's just no different. When you do the risk assessment properly, it should develop their version of a treatment plan, the HIPAA management plan. That's really your guide. If you ever get audited, that's the thing that the auditor wants to see. Show us your plan. They don't expect that you've done everything on day one, but they do want to see that you've at least made an effort to get yourself more compliant. You need a policies and procedure manual. When we do a risk assessment for our clients, we give them a customized manual. That's part of the process. You can get the ADA one. I would caution you though, the ADA manual is basically a template. There's a lot of stuff you need to fill in on your own. Make sure you actually, if you buy that, make sure you crack open the plastic and actually look. You'll see a lot of blank space in there. You really should, in my mind, have some cyber liability or breach insurance. We do 250,000 minimum. We have some clients that want more. If you ever suffer that breach, by the time you get through fines and penalties and legal and providing some type of credit monitoring for those patients, you really want to have coverage. I highly recommend that. Encrypt any devices that have electronic protected health information, EPHI, on them. That's simple. You should use an encrypted email system when communicating with patients or other offices. They're so inexpensive. They're $10 a user per month on average. Most of them will work with your existing email account, so you don't need to change email addresses. There's really no reason not to use an encrypted email system. Have a decent backup and disaster recovery plan in place that's tested and verified on a regular basis. How do you test it? Easiest way is turn off your server and see how long it takes to get back up and running. We test the virtual copies that we make for our clients, usually on a weekly basis. So we want to make sure that we know that we can get up and running quickly if there's a problem. You need to have some type of patch man in place. That's a law. The network monitoring, there isn't a law, but the software that would normally handle the patching typically will handle network monitoring. You're going to send an alert to your IT company that tells them, hey, your hard drive is full or corrupted, or there's a virus or something else is going on. General antivirus software is a must. Ransomware protection, anti-ransomware software in my mind is a must. And if you had a limited budget, you're only going to do one of those things, it would be the application of whitelisting. We have, as I said, I think about 350 active clients. We've got dozens and dozens of them that are on application whitelisting. Since we started installing this software, which was about 15 months ago, we have not seen a single virus on any one of those clients' computers. And I could not have said that beforehand. So if you have just an unlimited, a really limited budget, for most offices, I think the software, I got to double check, it's like $99 a month for up to 15 computers. For that peace of mind, I think it's worth 10 times that. If you are working with anyone that has access to your data, an accountant, an IT company, an email provider, a backup company, a practice management consultant, you must have a signed business associates agreement in place with them. You have to do staff training. We use ForMed training for that. When I send out the follow-up email tonight or tomorrow, I will include this link as well if you want to find it. It's not expensive. It's like $50 or $60 to train your staff members on it. You should, any website, any place that allows you to set up two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, you should have that in place. So I'm going to make 3 offers. And before we do that, just as a reminder, I know some of you came on a little bit late. The webinar was recorded. That recording will go out probably this evening, maybe tomorrow morning. Also, I'm able to offer continuing education credits as long as you were here for the bulk of the webinar. 4 minutes is not the bulk of the webinar, but if you were here for, I think it's like I got to double check, but I think it's like 3/4 of the webinar or more, then I can do the CE. That will be sent out as well with the, when I send out the recording. So that will go out sometime this evening, most likely, possibly tomorrow as well. But I do want to make a few offers to say thank you for your time and joining us this evening before we get to the Q&A session. The first off is, as I kind of been preaching this already, you don't know what you don't know. What we have been doing for a number of years is to offer what's called a security audit. It's not a risk assessment. It's not the 5 or 8 hour process. It's usually 20, 30 minutes. It's kind of that 30,000 foot view from above. And we used to charge for this. We still do charge for it, but I'm waiving that fee if you sign up for the audit. You don't have to complete it. You just have to sign up for it sometime before the end of June. The easiest way to sign up for that is just to go to my website. It's thedigitaldentist.com. Actually, that's a typo there. There should be an S after the HTTPS, but it is secure. But if you just put in the digital dentist or digitaldentist.com, you'll get sent to that site as well. I am also going to waive any fees if you just want to pick my brain. If you're not ready yet to do an actual audit, which it only takes 20, 30 minutes or so, and we give you a full report of what we found and what we recommend. But if you just want to talk, just ask me what I recommend and what your next step should be, you're welcome to do that through the website as well, or call us up. And I'm going to waive anything that we would normally charge for that process as well. Same thing, thedigitaldentist.com. If you go to the website, this is what you'll see. My picture, I've changed it so it says complimentary consultation. That will be in place until the end of June. Your name, the name of the practice, your email, your phone number. That sends an email to my office manager, Candace, and she would then follow up with you to find out exactly what you need and start that process. Let's say you're really shy, you don't want to call me, you don't want to do the free audit, but you want to get a little better idea where you're at when it comes to network security and HIPAA security and ransomware protection. I've created a document called the Security Predictor Checklist, and you can go to our website. It's a special website that I created. It's at go.thedigitaldentist.com. It's go.thedigitaldentist.com. And again, when I send out the follow-up email this evening, I will certainly make sure that those links are there as well. And you can go onto that, no pun intended, where you can actually download the Security Predictor Checklist, which is just 7 questions that we ask you to go through to see, where are you at? To give you a really good idea, where you are in this process. I mentioned that you really need to have a business associates agreement with anyone that has access to your data. Some of you may not know how to find that document, or maybe you've got a really old one because anything from pre-2013 is no longer valid. So I'm going to give you one. I have one that we've used for years, and I will, when I send out the recording and the CE, I'll send you a copy of the BAA that we use as well. You give it to anyone that has access to your data, you sign, they sign, make sure both people have a copy of it, and don't worry about it again, hopefully. There are many ways to get a hold of me. As I said, you can go to our website, which is thedigitaldentist.com. You can email me at drlevine@thedigitaldentist.com. We have a toll-free number. It's 866-204-3398. Extension 200 gets you to Candace, my office manager. If you need to talk with me, she'll find me. If I'm not available, she'll just schedule a time that we can talk. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. I'm on all the social media sites as well. So we've gotten to the point where I'm going to see what type of questions we have. I'm going to leave these offers up here as well, so you can see the offers that we currently have. Okay, we don't have a ton of questions, believe it or not. This is great. Okay, is this being recorded? If so, yes. So, Susanna, yes, entire process was recorded. That will go out. I'm pretty sure I'll get it out tonight. It may be sometime tomorrow morning, but I'm pretty sure I can get it out. A nice comment here. Yeah, this is funny from Brian. I can't even imagine reading 700 pages of HIPAA rule regulations. Well, I have, and it's as bad as it seems. I wanted to make sure I really understood it. It's just a snooze fest. Same thing with the NIST document 800-30. You really need to make sure that you understand it, but no one expects you to read through that. And that's why I always recommend working with an IT company that really has, experience with HIPAA, experience with cybersecurity, because you just don't have the time for it. It's not your area of expertise. You're productive when you're chairside. You're not productive when you're reading through 100 pages of how to do a risk assessment when there's people out there that can do it for you. Even if you read through it and you know exactly what they're talking about, it's one thing to understand it, it's another thing to actually be able to do it. I guess this question came a little bit before I started talking about web-based software. And what about dental software that's in the cloud, such as Curve? My two issues, as I said, I think web-based software is the future. There's no doubt that we're going to get to a point, whether it's in 10 years or 20 years, who knows, we are going to get to a point where all software is web-based. That's where we're heading. We're not there yet. If I were to survey the 350 clients that we have, I would put the percentage of people using web-based applications at maybe 5 to 10%, somewhere in that range, maybe a little bit less than that. So it's just not as popular. And the three reasons that that I have some hesitation: number one is that a lot of our clients that tell us this, I understand it, it makes sense, but I just don't feel comfortable giving my data to someone else. I don't know what they're going to do with it. And that is a valid concern. You have no idea what they're doing with that data. Now, they may have certain rules and regulations that they're supposed to follow. The web is littered with stories over the years of companies that have sold information that they were supposed to keep private to third parties. So that is hesitation number one. Hesitation number two, which we talked about, is that you need a persistent internet connection. And if your internet goes down, you're down. There's ways around that. You could, like I said, you could certainly do some type of hotspot. You could get a DSL, some additional connection that comes in there as well. The third concern or hesitation, as I said, is just price. It's just pricey. It's they're just not cheap systems out there, and you just don't have that much control over it. So I think it is as an option. As I said, I think it's a great option for multi-location practices, for DSOs. But as a solo practitioner, a single location practice, at the end of the day, though, I think one of the things I would always recommend to you is get the software that you think is the best fit for your practice. Don't worry. I mean, yes, of course, the cost matters, but at the end of the day, if there's a program that you thought was really inexpensive but it was just a nightmare to use, and you didn't get the support you need, and your staff are killing you about it, is it worth it? Did you really gain anything in the long run? And now you got to switch again, and it's just not a whole lot of fun. Okay, is there a ransomware situation where you should pay the ransom? To be honest with you, the majority of our clients who were hit with ransomware have paid the ransom. Now, the federal government will tell you you should never pay that. Insurance adjusters will say don't pay the ransom. At a certain point, if you don't have a backup, you are basically screwed. I mean, that's the bottom line. Now there is some old ransomware viruses out there that they have discovered the decryption keys for them. So if you're quote unquote lucky enough to get hit with a ransomware that uses that type of ransomware virus, there is a possibility you can decrypt it on your own. But if you cannot, if those files are locked and you don't have a backup, you are in trouble. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that up until about 2 years ago, I would tell offices, hey, as long as you got a good backup, you're in the clear. Now, as I mentioned previously, number one, you may not be in the clear, because if they practice this double or triple extortion where they put your data online, that backup's not going to really help you. The other thing is that we found is that some of the newer ransomware viruses out there can actually hit your backup. What we haven't seen yet, and maybe it's because of how we do our backup, is that we haven't seen a ransomware hit a cloud backup. The way that our backup works is that it runs the local backup first, and it then runs the cloud backup. If it notices a problem with the local backup, and your files being encrypted would definitely be a problem, if it notices that that backup is corrupted, it won't run the cloud backup, because obviously having that encrypted data online won't really help you. Now, in our particular case, even if it did happen, we wouldn't be in trouble, because we do what's called an incremental backup, where the backup only backs up the new or changed files. We can always still go to the previous day's backup and get that, which is exactly what would happen if something were to happen, that the cloud backup still ran those encrypted files. It would just be that day's backup, the previous day's backup we could restore, and we wouldn't have an issue with that. So in those cases, yeah, you probably are better off paying the ransom. You may not have a choice. If they've gone up, certainly over the last number of years, when the first times that people were hit for our clients, and this was obviously before they started working with us, on average, we were seeing 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Now it's not unusual at all to see $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 demands, if not higher than that. So you may not have the choice. This is why I think it's so critical, number one, that you have insurance in place, because if you have insurance and you get hit, you call them up and they take over. You're done with it at that point. They oftentimes can negotiate with these individuals. They will, they will approve you paying the ransom if that's the only solution. They're on your side. So, that's certainly something that you need to keep in mind, that you've got the insurance company there. But this is why I spent so much time throughout this presentation talking about prevention, because there is nothing better than making sure you never get ransomware in the first place. And again, that's why I'm so high on software like application whitelisting, because we have not seen any ransomware for those systems that have this in place. It just can't run. So you really need to, as I said, take this stacked approach. Well, we are out of questions, which is great. We're sort of towards the end of the presentation as well. I know your time is valuable. I want to thank all of you for joining this evening. It's a final reminder, a couple of things. First off, as I said, I mentioned a couple times already, we're recorded, so this will go out sometime tonight or tomorrow. CE credits will also go out as well at the same time if you've been here for the bulk of it. These offers are good for the next month plus. I'm happy to do the audit. The audit takes like 20, 30 minutes. We log onto your system with your permission. You can watch what we're doing. We gather data, and then I sit down with you in a phone conversation and go over everything. Here's what we found. Here's what we recommend. Here's your options. I mean, obviously, yes, we would love to work with you. Any of our clients, anyone that knows me knows that this is not a hard sell. What I'm here to do is to educate, to help guide you. Yes, I would be thrilled if you want to work with us. If not, you've got the information to go out and work with other companies that can help you. And as I said, this will help you in your evaluation of other IT companies. But whether it's to do the audit or just to pick my brain, or you want to go to that security predictor checklist at go.thedigitaladvance.com, I'll send out that BA as well. But I want to certainly, say that's my way of saying thank you for joining this evening and giving me your attention. I do these webinars fairly regularly. I do webinars for other companies. Most of you know that I moderate webinars for Denmat and Golden Dental and Next Health and ones like that. The ones for myself, I do them every couple of months. Any of you who are here this evening will be sent an invitation to attend the future webinars as well. So please stay healthy and safe out there. Thank you all for joining. Please reach out if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you all on future webinars and to be able to answer any questions that people have about their IT, their security, or HIPAA compliance. Good night, everyone.